I've got a young woman who was held hostage after being captured by Hamas on October 7. She's going to join me on the show tonight, and she'll tell her extraordinary story of how she survived the brutal treatment of those terrorists. Also tonight, hypocrisy prevails as Teal independents want a ban on big donors, just not their own. But first tonight, to Kevin Rudd's angry backlash at Donald Trump's comments today. The comments went global, with Trump, as you know by now, calling Australia's ambassador to Washington nasty and effectively unintelligent.
Now they've appointed Kevin Rudd, former Labour MP. I mean, he has said the most horrible things. You were a destructive president, a traitor to the West, and he's now Australia's ambassador in Washington.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
Would you take a phone call from him?
He won't be there long if that's the case. I don't know much about him. I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
Well, I can reveal that Rudd is furious about it and is blaming us here at Sky News for sending Nigel Farage that question. He's blaming Sky News for damaging diplomatic relations, and he's claiming it's all because we don't like him. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. In fact, Rudd brought this all upon himself when he decided it was a good idea to post a tweet calling the then President Trump nuts in 2020. He described Trump as the most destructive president in history. Rudd said he drags America and democracy through the mud. He thrives in fomenting, not healing, division. He abuses Christianity, church and Bible to justify violence, all aided and abetted by Murdoch's Fox News network in America, which feeds this. Rudd's tweet himself from 2020. Well, Rudd can't expect us not to ask Trump about these comments when Rudd spent years calling for a royal commission into our company and endlessly criticised our public interest journalism. Like Rudd, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was also furious today when he was asked about this in question time.
Will the Prime Minister be reassessing Mr Rudd's position as ambassador to our most important, or as Minister Farrell suggests, our second most important strategic ally?
At a time when Australians are worried about the cost of living and a range of issues that affect their daily lives, they decide to politicise Australia's representative in Washington, D.C.
And Albanese went on to say that the coalition question was a cheap shot. But what about those tweets from Mr Rudd, a former Australian Prime Minister, when Donald Trump was president? Any mention of those being a cheap shot? Make no mistake, the comments to Nigel Farage weren't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. Trump's inner circle has been unhappy with Rudd being the Australian ambassador in Washington for a while. Just last month, Steve Bannon, a confidant of Trump's, told me that Rudd has been trying to worm his way into the Trump inner circle, but that the former president has a long memory.
Ambassador Rudd should know that we got his number. I mean, Rudd is, for people in the United States, folks in Australia should know, Rudd, puts himself out as the expert in the world on China and the Chinese Communist Party. I think he's been dead wrong so many times. He is trying to worm his way back into the good graces. He's been very critical of President Trump in the past.
Well, Rudd's long-term friend, Joe Hockey, also a former US ambassador, defended him on 2GB and on Sky after those Bannon comments, saying that Rudd had met with the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and former Trump National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, two figures, by the way, who'd now be working closely with Scott Morrison, who did have a good relationship with Trump.
I know the work he's been doing with the Republicans and with the people affiliated with Trump. It doesn't surprise me that Steve Bannon's not one of them, but I know he's been speaking with people like Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien because they tell me. And he's been very active on a number of things.
Well, Hockey can defend Rudd until he's blue in the face, but it's not going to convince Trump that Rudd should remain as our man in Washington. Team Rudd say they won't have a problem with Trump if he becomes president, that he's transactional, and they point to the example of Lindsey Graham, who predicted that Trump would destroy the Republican Party back in 2016, but now is a close ally. But perhaps Albanese and Kevin Rudd forget that former British ambassador to the United States, Kim DeRoche, had to resign from his post after the leak of cables where he criticised Trump. And it is within Trump's power to sack Rudd. The host country of an ambassador can declare any diplomat a persona non grata and hence send them home. So you'd think it's a sign of Penny Wong's meagre grasp of diplomacy that she sees no reason to be concerned after Trump's comments today about Kevin Rudd.
Point you in particular to the phenomenal amount of work which has been done on AUKUS in the period that he's been ambassador. He's been extremely active in engaging with members of Congress on both sides of politics, and he is a former Prime Minister, a former Foreign Minister. His experience and skills mean he will be able to work closely with whomever is elected by the American people as the United States President.
Well, this is just more nonsense from the woman who's just directed millions of your taxpayer funds to the Hamas supporting UNRWA. Of course, Kevin Rudd should never have been appointed to this critical role. Remember, even Anthony Albanese rubbished as complete nonsense the notion that he was going to make Rudd US ambassador. But then after winning the federal election, Albanese went back on his word, on his bond, in one of many examples now too numerous to count. And by the way, it's not just Rudd. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill called Donald Trump Jr. a big baby and a sore loser in a tweet that she was forced to delete by her annoyed colleagues a few hours later. But Rudd's evisceration of Trump and O'Neill's juvenile tweeting indicate that the Albanese government does have cause for concern should Trump return to the White House, as is widely predicted later this year. It's no secret that in Australia we don't have the defence capabilities to defend ourselves militarily, despite what the moronic Trade Minister Don Farrell said ahead of today's visit by the Chinese Foreign Minister. The United States is our closest and most trusted ally. It's our most important security partner. We share intelligence through the Five Eyes arrangement. And should we ever need it, it's the US that will come to our aid in a military conflict in our region, not New Zealand or any other nation. The strength of the US-Australia alliance dates back to the 1942 Battle of the Coral Sea. And Albanese shouldn't have risked disrespecting or endangering the relationship through his reckless appointment of Kevin Rudd. All right, to discuss this and the rest of the day's top stories, let's bring in now former Labor Minister Graham Richardson and former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger. Welcome, gentlemen. Graham, what needs to happen now? Do you think Rudd should remain as our ambassador? And is it realistic that he will be able to deal with Trump if Trump's president again?
I don't believe he should remain as our ambassador, no. I'm not a great fan of the old Kevins, I'd have to say, and I think recent events would suggest that my bias is correct. So no, I would remove him and put in someone who can work closely with the government in America, no matter who gets elected.
Well, Richard, just quickly to follow that up, why did Albanese make such a stupid appointment then?
Oh, they've just been close friends for a long time. And so I think Albo was being loyal, which is one of the qualities we all recognise in him.
Well, loyalty, but now look at the former president, the potential future president, and what he said about our ambassador. Michael, is this a rift that you think can be repaired?
No, there's no chance of it being repaired. The backstory to this, Sharri, is 2 years ago on Sky, I said, as did a number of others, I think Rowan Dean was one of those others, who said that Albanese was going to appoint Rudd as ambassador to the United States. That was 2 years ago. Albanese came out and denied that. Rudd famously said it was a News Limited conspiracy. I think it was on the front page of The Australian at the time, about 2 years ago. Rudd said, "This is a News Limited conspiracy. I've got no interest or intention of being the US ambassador, even if the government offered me the job." So what happened? He got the job. I'll give you another prediction, which Albo doesn't know about yet. By the 20th of March next year, 1 year from today, if Trump's elected, Rudd will be gone. He'll resign. Albo won't sack him for the reasons that Graham said. Albo will resign. The Trump administration will blank Australia. He will never get to present his credentials to Trump. And no senior member of the Trump administration, if he gets elected, will deal with Rudd or Australia. This guy is completely persona non grata. He should never have been appointed, but he'll be gone by 20 March 2025 if Donald Trump wins.
Well, that's a big prediction. We'll see. I don't think Rudd would leave such a plum post voluntarily. I mean, that's not in his nature, is it, Richo?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting a lot of this. Can you say that again?
I said, well, Michael Kroger's just predicted that if Trump should win, that Kevin Rudd would resign as his post as US ambassador, Australia's ambassador in Washington. But I'm saying it's not in his nature to voluntarily give up such a plum posting.
No, I think most of the time you'd have to get a Sherman tank to push him out of the job. He's not going to want to go. He's going to want to stay. And you know what the old Kevin's like? The one thing we can all agree about Kevin is stubborn. That is an adjective you can always describe him with.
Well, people I spoke to today insisted that he had changed from when he was Prime Minister. We'll see. Now, Foreign Minister Penny Wong.
You know, I remember, years ago, by the way, Sharri, years ago, I remember, Richard, you'll remember that Keating said of John Howard, he's got his backside aerodated to the seat. Well, that aerolite, anything left over, Kevin's backside will be aerodated to the plum, couch in there and in the Australian ambassador's residence, but it won't matter. There'll be a blowtorch to detach him from the couch. He will not be ambassador for more than 20 March next year. He'll be gone. He will have to resign because Albo will ring him in the end and say, mate, we can't have Australia's interests in the United States completely curtailed because of you, and Rudd will have to resign.
Look, I don't think Albanese has the courage to do that, but look, I hope your prediction is true. We'll see. Now, Foreign Minister Penny Wong met her Chinese counterpart Wang Yi today. Penny Wong did raise the case of the Australian who has been given a suspended death sentence, Dr. Yang Hyung-jun, but his friend, UTS Associate Professor Feng Chongyi, told the Australian today that Labor had, over the past 2 years, prioritised trade with China at the expense of other principles, at the expense of human rights principles. Richo, this is true, isn't it? We've barely heard the Albanese government say a word about the human rights atrocities in China.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. The relationship with China is an incredibly difficult balance for Australia. It's never easy. They are the country that we have to plan against for an invasion. We have to. Our subs are out there to sink Chinese ships, and yet they're our biggest trading partner, and we need them. It's a balancing act that Houdini would be flat out managing. So good luck to any government trying.
Well, Michael, I think other governments have handled the balancing act better, put our sovereignty first. But, Penny Wong's denying that there was any quid pro quo ahead of this visit by Wang Yi. But there is reports that the Albanese government dropped its anti-dumping case against the Chinese windmills just last Friday. Plus, we saw the Trade Minister Don Farrell on Monday claim that New Zealand is now our most trusted ally. So do you believe Penny Wong when she says no deals have been done?
No, I think it was a wink-wink. When you're dealing with communist countries like China, repressive regimes, it's like smoke. You never get the full story. You never know what's going on. They talk in double Dutch. The foreign minister from China refuses to give an interview here. Penny's speaking in, that sort of foreign policy double speak. Obviously, there was a wink-wink. The Chinese media are reporting that it was a wink-wink. If you drop this, we'll drop that ban on the wine and lobsters. So something happened behind the scenes. That's pretty obvious. But of course, Wong has to come out and deny it. But as Richo said, this is a very difficult relationship. By the way, the long-term answer to all of this, and it's easier said than done, given what we export to them, as Richo said, our biggest trading partner now, over the next 20 years, Australia has to wean itself off China. You can't continue to be in an economic relationship with a repressive regime that is advancing its military interests and strategic interests throughout the Pacific region, and us pretend nothing's happening. I mean, as Richo says, our subs are out there to sink Chinese boats, but at the same time we're sort of, breaking bread with them. It's a clash of civilisations, and ultimately it will come to a sticky end.
Yeah,
it can't continue.
No, and it worries me so much that we hear every day, basically from Penny Wong or other members of the government, criticism of Israel, our friend, our ally, our democracy, and yet no criticism of China. I mean, it just seems like all of the priorities, particularly in the foreign policy space, are in upheaval. Michael Kroger, Graham Richardson, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you both so much. Now, after the break, a former Hamas hostage will join me. She's going to tell me her incredible story of how she survived captivity. And then coming up, the Donald Trump interview with Nigel Farage. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, Moran Stella Yanai is the first woman who was taken hostage by Hamas to visit Australia. For 54 days, she was shuffled between 7 different locations in Gaza. She survived with barely any food or water and was in constant fear of dying. Moran shared with me her story of determination and survival just a moment ago. Moran, thank you so much for having the courage to join us today.
Thank you so much. It's my privilege to be here.
Moran, you were at the Nova Music Festival to sell jewellery. What happened to you on the morning of October 7?
I was going to the Nova Festival to fulfill my dream. And at 6:29, this dream literally turned into a nightmare. It was completely chaos everywhere, and everybody was running all over the place. Some of the people didn't understand what was going on. It took us 5 hours to escape and to hide until we got caught.
And so you were captured by Hamas. Can you tell us what happened and how that unfolded?
So I was captured. Actually, I was caught 3 times, and I managed to escape twice. But in the 3rd time, I broke my leg, and I was not able to run anymore. And then the Hamas terrorists caught me and passed me to a group of 13 Hamas terrorists. I was dragged into Gaza. I was beaten all through the way. It felt like it was a huge party, a huge fiesta for all the civilians in Gaza, us entering as hostages. And that experience, that image, I will never forget.
So they were celebrating as you were terrified, being dragged in there. Where were you taken?
I was taken to a very small house. There is no situation that you feel safe even for 1 minute. And on top of it, everything is forbidden. It's forbidden to cry, it's forbidden to talk, it's forbidden to think. They literally want to numb you in every possible way.
You've said the hunger and the despair was unbearable. How bad did it get? How dark were the times for you in the 54 days that you were held hostage?
So obviously I needed to help myself fight every single day, not to let them break me. But the condition and the mental fight that they're running against your mind, you need to understand it's on a daily basis, it's every minute. You need to protect yourself for everything, from their mental fight against you, from the neighbors not to find you, from the bombing, from yourself, and on top of that to be hungry and to be frustrated.
You were also forced to dress in disguise, and you were moved around to, I think, 7 different places while you were in Gaza. Can you tell us about that?
So moving in between the houses is, you cannot be exposed to the civilians because you need to hide from them too. So obviously they forced us to disguise every time we moved the house. So every time it was a different disguise. If I was with my broken leg, then I was like an old lady on a wheelchair. And then the other time I had to pretend that I'm a part of a family. And one time I had to pretend that I'm the Hamas wife. And it's like changing every time.
And some of your friends that you were taken hostage with at the time, I understand they didn't make it out alive.
One friend, that one particular boy, this is not a boy, very much a man. When I left him, we said we're gonna meet in Tel Aviv in the street and we will talk about our experience. 3 weeks later, he was murdered in Gaza, and they still blame that Israel killed him. It doesn't matter because they took him from his house. They killed his mother, they killed his father, and then they murdered him. His sister is literally stayed by herself right now with no family because of one day, because of one decision that one person took, that he wants to eliminate everything.
So sorry, Moran. You've said that when the terrorists were angry, they took it out on the hostages, that every minute you were fearful. Can you tell us, so that we understand what the circumstances are like, what are some of the things that Hamas did when they did get angry at the hostages?
So, you know, I told my story so many times, I don't really want to go into specific details right now, but I want you all to understand that every single day is unexpected. If it's one time that I was gun pointed to my head, if it was one time that I was beaten, and I'm thinking about the rest of the girls that are sitting there right now, that they just started their life. They don't have the tools to deal with this situation. And I think that main goal right now is to do everything impossible. Everyone is responsible to take them and to take them out.
Do you think the international community should be doing more to help the hostages?
I think that I know that it's been almost 6 months now, and I know that people are going into their daily routine because it's inevitable. But that's what we do now, to remind everybody to not forget, because this is the most terrifying thing that a hostage could ever experience, to be forgotten, to be stopped fighting for him.
When you were being held captive, did you worry that you were being forgotten? Is that something that Hamas told you, that your country wasn't coming to find you, that they didn't care?
Yeah, that's a daily routine, to come, to say that our family is not fighting for us, that we have no country to go back to because everything is burning, that our army is a coward army and is not coming to fight for us, and that our government is rejecting us coming back home, which obviously was not true because our people are so united right now.
If you're not comfortable to answer this question, I completely understand. There has been a lot of criticism of the women's organisations internationally for ignoring the rape and sexual violence from Hamas towards Jewish women. Is that something that you would like to speak about? Do you feel angry at those organisations?
This is not my story to tell, but I know from first-hand testimony that they can deny it as much as they want to, but it happened, and it happened in so many ways. Not only the conventional way that everybody is thinking about her. I'm not the presenter of that, but we do keep on fighting for that because it's not possible that people will deny that situation when obviously there are testimonies and evidence that it did happen, that it did occur. At the beginning, we did not want to talk about it because we wanted to protect at any cost of all the girls, but this is a situation that cannot be denied, because there are tons of evidence that it happened. And I know from firsthand that it did happen. But
what is, your one call of action, your message to the international community? Do you think there should be more pressure put on Qatar, for example, which is housing Hamas leadership, to release the hostages? Do you think the Israeli government should be doing more? What do you strongly feel needs to happen now?
I think that each and every one is responsible. Each and every one, each and every civilian, each and every human being. Because if it will stay like this, if they will not come back home, and I believe that everyone has the same amount of power.
We can only pray that that happens and it happens quickly. It's been too long already. Moran, I have to thank you for your courage in doing this interview, your only television interview here in Australia. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, that's it from me tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. And up now is former leader of the UK Brexit Party and GB News host Nigel Farage with his one-on-one interview with Donald Trump.